In the pitch-black waters of the Philippine Sea, the difference between a predator and a grave comes down to less than 60 seconds. It is February 10th, 1945. Commander John Fyfe, inside the USS Batfish, is staring at a sonar scope that isn't making sense. He has tracked 2 Japanese submarines in the last 48 hours. He has sunk them both. But this third contact is changing the geometry. If Fyfe stays submerged, he loses the angle. If he fires too early, he misses. So, he makes a decision that defies every instinct of survival. He orders the Batfish to surface, trading the safety of the deep for speed, right in the face of the enemy. It was a gamble that would either make history or turn the Batfish into a burning wreck. To understand how a methodical commander ended up in a surface duel in the middle of the night, we have to go back 4 days. The Philippine Sea lay flat and dark. The USS Batfish moved without lights, diesels throttled low, her hull slicing through water that reflected nothing but stars. Inside the submarine, red lamps glowed over plotting tables and sonar scopes. Men whispered bearings. Pencils scratched grease boards. For the 3rd straight night, Batfish was waiting in the same narrow stretch of ocean, a corridor Japanese submarines had begun using as they fled collapsing bases in the Philippines. 2 had already passed through. 2 had already vanished. Batfish's captain, Commander John K. Fyfe, did not pace the deck or deliver speeches. Patrol reports described him as methodical, precise, the kind of officer who treated submarine warfare as a geometry problem rather than a duel of nerves. Every attack was built from speed, angle, and patience. If those numbers worked, the result followed. By early 1945, Japan's undersea fleet was under crushing pressure. American landings had cut supply routes through the central Philippines. Air patrols swept former Japanese strongholds. Fuel shortages forced submarines to conserve power wherever they could. That meant running on the surface at night, batteries recharging, crews racing north towards safer ports before daylight exposed them to aircraft. American intelligence had noticed the pattern. So had Batfish. She had been assigned to intercept those movements, one boat, alone, sitting astride an invisible highway in the dark. Fyfe understood what that meant. It was not glamorous work. It was waiting. Hours of nothing, broken only by routine checks and sonar pings sliding through water colder than the air above it. Then, suddenly, a contact would appear, a faint return drifting across the screen, and everything would accelerate. On the night of February 9th, it had happened just after midnight. A surface contact moving north at steady speed. Fyfe maneuvered into position without raising his periscope, letting sonar and dead reckoning build the firing solution. When the geometry lined up, he ordered 4 torpedoes. 2 struck. Post-war records later identified the target as RO-55. She disappeared in a rush of spray and flame, leaving no survivors. The following night, almost at the same hour, Batfish picked up another. Same heading. Same behavior. Another submarine running on the surface, trying to cover miles before dawn. Fyfe repeated the process with near-clinical calm. Row 112 went down. 2 submarines in 48 hours. For the crew, it was exhausting rather than triumphant. Reloading torpedo tubes in a cramped hull took hours. Sonar operators strained through static and biologic noise. Every man knew that success increased danger. Each sinking made it more likely the enemy would grow cautious or crowded. Fyfe noted that in his patrol log, success changed traffic patterns. Success attracted attention. By the 3rd night, Batfish was back in position again. Samikohidor. Same dark sea. Different tension. Shortly after midnight, sonar picked up another return. Range and bearing looked familiar enough to lull the watch team into routine. The contact was running north, speed consistent with a submarine on the surface. Fyfe ordered battle stations. The plotting party began calculating intercept angles. The torpedo room prepared another salvo. Everything about the setup echoed the previous nights. Then the contact altered course. It was subtle at first, a slow drift off the projected line, but enough to make the firing geometry wobble. Sonar updated the bearing again. The turn continued. Fyfe leaned over the chart table. Submarine commanders learned to recognize patterns. Boats trying to escape usually ran straight. A sudden cross-turn could mean detection, or coincidence, or something harder to define. Fyfe recalculated. The intercept solution degraded. Moments later, sonar operators reported something else. Faint returns. Not strong enough to classify. Not steady enough to confirm, but present. Fyfe did not know whether it was biologics, surface clutter, or another vessel. He knew only that the picture had grown complicated. If Batfish remained submerged, she would stay hidden but slow. If the contact continued maneuvering, the window for an attack would close. The submarine world offered no pause button. Fyfe delayed firing. He waited. The contact kept turning. Now the firing angle narrowed further. Records later show that Fyfe debated whether to reposition entirely, a move that would take precious minutes and might cost the opportunity altogether. Instead, he made a choice that surprised some of the men watching him. He ordered Batfish to surface. Compressed air roared through ballast tanks. The submarine rose, water cascading off her deck plating as diesels coughed to life. On the surface, Batfish traded stealth for speed. Zeventig knots. Maneuvering room. Options. Fyfe swung toward the new bearing and prepared to fire. What exactly lay ahead remained unclear. Later records would confirm that the submarine he engaged that night was RO-113. The third Japanese boat Batfish would sink in 4 days. What remains uncertain is whether another submarine was truly nearby, or whether sonar echoes had produced a misleading picture in congested waters. Fyfe did not have the luxury of hindsight. He had seconds to act on what his instruments told him. He ordered torpedoes ready. Batfish closed the distance. Within minutes, 4 weapons ran from her bow tubes. 2 struck. RO-113 vanished beneath the surface. No distress calls followed. No counterattack developed. Sonar returns faded into silence. Fyfe withdrew before dawn. 3 enemy submarines destroyed in 4 days. A record unmatched by any other American boat during the war. But in his patrol report, he avoided drama. He wrote about bearings, speeds, angles, and the decision to surface when remaining submerged risked surrendering control of the fight. There was no mention of heroics, only arithmetic, only necessity. Batfish slipped north again, leaving burning oil and empty water behind her. For the men aboard, the corridor had gone quiet. They did not know whether more submarines would follow. They did not know whether Japanese commanders had noticed the trap. They knew only that they would be back in position again the next night. Waiting. When Batfish slipped back into darkness after sinking RO-113, she was not alone in that patch of ocean. Across the western Pacific, American submarines had begun tightening invisible nets around Japan's shrinking perimeter. By early 1945, the United States Navy controlled the air above most Philippine waters during daylight. Surface patrols roamed choke points. Minefields guarded harbors that had once felt safe. For Japanese submariners, the map of the Pacific was shrinking. The bases around Manila, Cebu, and Davao were being abandoned under pressure from advancing ground forces and relentless air attack. Boats that once prowled sea lanes now received orders to run north to Formosa or the Japanese home islands before fuel stocks ran out entirely. Many left under cover of darkness, traveling surface to recharge batteries and maximize speed, then diving at dawn to hide from patrol planes. That patterned surface at night, dive by day, was visible to American analysts. So were the routes. Charts drawn aboard fleet headquarters began to show likely escape corridors threading through open water and between islands. Submarines were assigned to sit astride those paths the way hunters waited along game trails. Batfish was one of them. Fyfe's patrol sector northeast of Luzon covered one such funnel. It was not a harbor approach or a shipping lane in the usual sense, but a stretch of sea that geography and fuel limitations quietly forced fleeing boats to use. The crew aboard Batfish never saw the intelligence summaries that predicted traffic. They only saw the results. Contacts appearing on schedule, moving north, hugging similar speeds. After the third sinking, Fyfe chose not to linger in that exact position. Patrol doctrine warned against becoming predictable. A submarine that scored multiple kills in one small area risked attracting aircraft, surface escorts, or mine-sweeping sweeps. Batfish shifted her patrol line slightly, staying within the corridor but changing angles and depths. The crew took what rest they could. Torpedomen wiped sweat from bulkheads slick with condensation. Sonar operators rotated watches, ears ringing from hours of static and machinery noise. Nobody spoke about records. They spoke about batteries. Fuel. The next contact. American post-war analysis would later confirm what Fyfe suspected at the time. Japanese submarines in February 1945 were not conducting aggressive patrols in Philippine waters. Most were moving north under orders to redeploy or escape before bases fell. That meant crews were often exhausted, running on reduced fuel margins, radios silent to avoid detection, and captains focused more on survival than combat. That did not make them harmless. A submerged submarine with torpedoes was dangerous in any era, and Batfish had just revealed herself in that corridor. Whether Japanese command understood exactly what was happening remains unclear. What is documented is simpler. 3 boats failed to arrive. Radio schedules went silent. Positions went unreported. In wartime oceans, that silence was often the only warning commanders received. Batfish continued north for several hours after the February 10th engagement, before slowing and submerging again. Fyfe reviewed damage reports, none, and ammunition counts reduced, but sufficient to fight again. His crew remained at heightened alert. There was no victory parade in a submarine. Only the knowledge that every torpedo fired reduced future options. In his patrol log, Fyfe noted the surface attack and the rapid disappearance of sonar contacts afterward. He did not claim to have broken an ambush. He did not speculate about coordinated enemy movements. He recorded what instruments showed. That restraint would matter decades later, when historians tried to reconstruct what had happened. By mid-February, Batfish was ordered to remain on station rather than return to port. American commanders wanted continued pressure along the escape routes, while larger fleet operations unfolded elsewhere in the Philippines. Above the water, carrier aircraft were striking airfields. On land, American and Filipino forces were pushing toward Manila. At sea, destroyer groups patrolled straits. And beneath it all, submarines waited. Batfish's patrol was one thread in a much larger web. The men aboard did not know how decisive that web had become. They only knew the ocean around them felt empty. Then, slowly, traffic returned. Not in waves, in single, cautious shapes drifting across sonar scopes hours apart. Fyfe's approach changed. After 3 quick successes, he grew conservative. Contacts were tracked longer. Attack solutions refined. Escape routes plotted before torpedoes were readied. He did not want another surface engagement unless forced into one. The earlier decision had worked. It did not mean repeating it was wise. For viewers following this story now, it is easy to imagine February 1945 as a single dramatic sprint. It was not. It was a grind. Long hours of listening, calculating, waiting. If you find yourself leaning forward during moments like these, the pauses between action when everything depends on instruments and judgment tapping, the like button helps keep these quieter wartime stories alive on the platform. They rarely make headlines, but they decided campaigns. Batfish remained on patrol for days after her run of successes, never encountering another Japanese submarine in that same concentration. The corridor had gone cold. Either the traffic had stopped, or it had learned to go somewhere else. Fyfe could not know which. He only knew that his boat had survived something unusual. 3 kills in 4 days was not how submarine patrols usually unfolded. Most ended with none. Some ended with the submarine missing, and no explanation at all. As Batfish continued her slow circuits through dark water, the record she had set would ripple through submarine squadrons long before the war ended. Not because of speeches, because other captains read the patrol reports and noticed the same thing Fyfe had written between the lines. Geometry mattered, patience mattered, and sometimes survival came down to recognizing that the picture in front of you had changed and acting before it became too late. Batfish remained on patrol for several more days after the sudden collapse of traffic in her sector. No more submarines appeared in that narrow stretch of sea. Whether Japanese commanders diverted their boats elsewhere or simply ran out of vessels able to make the attempt remains unclear. Wartime records from the Imperial Navy are fragmentary, and many logs were destroyed before surrender. What is certain is that the pattern that had fed Batfish 3 targets in 4 nights did not repeat. Fyfe eventually received orders to withdraw and return to base. The boat turned south, then east, slipping back through waters now dominated by American aircraft and surface patrols. For the crew, the tension eased only slowly. Submariners carried vigilance with them long after danger faded. Men slept lightly. Watches remained sharp. 3 small silhouettes were painted on Batfish's hull after the patrol ended. They were not accompanied by speeches. They did not come with ceremonies at sea. They were simply marks of arithmetic ships that had been present, then were not. Official Navy summaries later confirmed what the crew already knew. Batfish had sunk 3 Japanese submarines, RO-55, RO-112, and RO-113 in 4 days during February 1945. No other American submarine matched that sequence. It became a statistic passed quietly among crews rather than broadcast in headlines. Part of the reason was timing. By early 1945, the submarine campaign had reached a brutal maturity. American boats were sinking merchant ships by the hundreds. Entire Japanese supply networks had collapsed. One extraordinary patrol was only a thread inside a much larger fabric of maritime strangulation. But Batfish's run mattered for another reason. It illustrated how the war beneath the waves had evolved. Submarine commanders no longer hunted convoys alone. They operated within webs of intelligence, patrol lines, air coverage, and traffic analysis. What happened off Luzon was not just one captain's instinct, but the visible edge of a massive system grinding down Japan's ability to move men and fuel across the Pacific. For Fyfe, the patrol ended the way most submarine patrols did, quietly. No reporters waited on the pier. Debriefings focused on technical details. Sunalogs, torpedo performance, fuel consumption. The surface engagement from February 10th received careful attention. Officers wanted to know why Fyfe had chosen speed over concealment and what the sonar picture had looked like before the order to surface. Fyfe's own reports stayed restrained. He described geometry, degraded firing angles, and the need to regain maneuvering room. There were no dramatic claims. No references to duels. Only decisions made under uncertainty. Historians would later rely heavily on that tone, because it is often what separates memory from myth. After the war, Batfish was decommissioned and eventually preserved as a museum ship in Muskogee, Oklahoma, a long way from the Philippine Sea where she had stalked dark corridors and empty water. Visitors today walk through her narrow passageways and see the cramped bunks, the torpedo racks, the control room where bearings were called out in clipped voices. It is easy to forget how much of a submarine's war consisted of waiting rather than firing. But it is the waiting that made moments, like February 10th, possible. The wrecks Batfish sent to the bottom remain somewhere in deep water. RO-55, RO-112, RO-113. Steel cylinders resting in darkness. Their stories preserved mostly in patrol reports and faded archive boxes. They are not famous wrecks. No expedition crews have filmed them. No plaques mark their coordinates. But for naval historians, they form a small, precise case study in how late-war submarine operations unfolded fast, asymmetric, and governed less by heroics than by mathematics. If you value stories like this where history is rebuilt from logs rather than legend subscribing, keeps them coming. Each week we examine moments that rarely make textbooks but shaped the outcome of the war. Batfish's patrol did not change the course of the Pacific by itself. It did something quieter. It demonstrated what the American undersea campaign had become by 1945. Systematic, patient, and lethal to any ship, forced into predictable routes. It also shows something timeless, that even in an industrial war dominated by machines, outcomes still hinged on human judgment, on recognizing when patterns broke and deciding whether to adapt before it was too late. When Batfish sailed away from that corridor northeast of Luzon, the ocean closed behind her. No markers remained. No witnesses floated on the surface. Only a widening emptiness where 3 submarines had passed and never returned. That emptiness, multiplied across the Pacific, was one of the quiet forces that ended the war at sea. And it began, not with a fleet engagement or a dramatic broadcast, but with a sonar echo in the dark and a captain who realized the picture in front of him had changed.